Welcome to Cognitive Dose. We are here, as always, curing blind spots and shattering cognitive bias. Welcome to the debate.
Glad to be here.
So, if you look at the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, the popular historical narrative paints a very specific picture of how the world avoided nuclear annihilation.
Right, it's a very famous story.
Exactly. I mean, while generals were screaming for a preemptive strike, President John F. Kennedy deliberately slowed down. He took time to doodle sailboats on a legal pad. He went for long swims on the White House pool to clear his head.
Yeah, he actively chose deliberate thought over, impulsive retaliation.
Precisely. And the story suggests that this specific individualized psychological mastery, this profound inner calm, is what de-escalated the deadliest standoff in human history.
As the ultimate lever of geopolitical power.
And that framing is really the launchpad for what we are analyzing today. We are looking at Ryan Holiday's massively popular book, Stillness is the Key.
It's been incredibly influential, yeah.
Huge. I mean, you see Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, elite athletes, and overloaded knowledge workers treating this book as an absolute gospel. I'll be taking the position that Holiday has achieved something remarkable here, offering a highly functional shield against modern burnout.
And I will be coming at this from the opposite direction. Because beneath the accessible prose, I will be making the case that the book relies on extreme survivorship bias, completely misunderstands its ancient sources, and ultimately serves as an instrument of corporate pacification.
Okay, well, let's lay the foundation first, because we really need to understand why this concept of stillness has struck such a chord.
Fair enough.
We live in an era characterized by profound decision fatigue, right? Between the 24-hour news cycle, constant notifications, and the demands of an always-on economy, people are just exhausted.
Absolutely.
So, Holiday's central thesis is that cultivating emotional detachment and cognitive quietude isn't just some soft, new-age luxury. It is an essential prerequisite for clear thinking and superior performance. He basically frames asceticism as a competitive advantage.
Which is a very seductive pitch. You're telling an exhausted workforce that the secret to outperforming their peers is to simply care a little bit less and breathe a little bit more.
Well, I would frame it more as strategic compartmentalization. The book leans heavily on a modern adaptation of Epictetus's dichotomy of control.
Right, separating what you can control from what you can't.
Exactly. We must ruthlessly separate what is up to us from what is not. In practice, the book advises readers to limit media inputs, actively ignore the noise, and retreat into healing silence.
Just tune it all out.
Yeah, I actually think of it like putting on a mental noise-canceling headset. By utilizing this framework, you create a hermetically sealed cognitive environment where deep work and true creativity can finally hatch. And Holiday uses the JFK anecdote I mentioned earlier to prove that this works even under the highest possible stakes.
That sounds elegant in theory, but the data suggests a totally different reality. That JFK anecdote is exactly where the methodological collapse begins.
Really? How so?
I mean, it is the perfect example of retrospective narrative fallacy, to borrow a term from Nassim Taleb, and extreme survivorship bias. By attributing the de-escalation solely to JFK's personal stillness, the book renders its own historical analysis scientifically null.
That seems a bit harsh.
It completely ignores the massive macro geopolitical deterrents that were actually driving the outcome.
So you're suggesting Kennedy's temperament didn't play a role in preventing a nuclear strike?
I'm saying it was a marginal factor compared to systemic realities. First, you have the overarching doctrine of mutually assured destruction, or MAD, that functioned as a structural deterrent completely independent of Kennedy's emotional state.
Okay, sure, MAD was a factor.
And second, the crisis was actually resolved through secret, back-channel diplomacy, specifically treating U.S. Jupiter missiles out of Turkey. And third, and this is the element most inconvenient for a self-help narrative, pure, uncontrolled luck.
Are you referring to the submarine incident?
Yes, Vasily Arkhipov. He was a Soviet submarine officer stationed on the B-59 near Cuba. His submarine was being hit by practice depth charges from U.S. forces.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the crew was exhausted. The air conditioning had failed, temperatures were over 100 degrees, and they had lost contact with Moscow. The captain believed World War III had already started and actually ordered the launch of a nuclear torpedo.
But it obviously wasn't launched.
Right, because of Arkhipov. By sheer chance of protocol requiring 3 officers to agree, he was the sole dissenting vote. He single-handedly refused the launch. That world-saving decision happened entirely outside of JFK's stillness, his awareness, or his control.
Okay, I see the historical omission there. But, authors of applied philosophy often extract a specific behavioral trait to illustrate a point. The book isn't claiming to be an exhaustive history of the Cold War.
No, but it's claiming to be a blueprint for success.
Sure, it's using a vignette to demonstrate the power of keeping a cool head under pressure. Even if other factors were present, Kennedy's ability to remain calm was undeniably beneficial.
The problem is when you build a philosophy on silent evidence. The book systematically ignores all the historical actors who practiced immense stillness, who were incredibly calm but were still slaughtered or outmaneuvered by superior logistics.
Well, history is messy.
Exactly, and it cherry-picks figures whose lives actively contradict the premise. I mean, the book holds up Winston Churchill and Napoleon Bonaparte as exemplars of this necessary stillness.
But Churchill did have his moments of profound isolation and reflection, right? Like his bricklaying and painting at Chartwell.
True, but historical consensus paints Churchill as a man driven by frantic, manic energy specifically to outrun severe clinical depression, what he called his black dog.
Right, he was famously hyperactive.
He relied heavily on alcohol and hyperactivity, not serene cognitive quietude. And Napoleon was defined by relentless ego-driven aggression and an absolute inability to remain still, which is exactly what led to his catastrophic ruin in the Russian winter.
So you're saying the examples don't fit the thesis?
I'm saying that extracting isolated moments of contemplation from these incredibly chaotic lives is the analytical equivalent of firing an arrow into a wall and meticulously painting a bullseye around it.
Letty challenge that perspective, because I think we risk throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. Even if the history is slightly romanticized to make the medicine go down easier, the behavioral management tools themselves are highly effective.
Effective for what, exactly?
For daily life. We know from modern cognitive behavioral therapy that compartmentalization works. If translating ancient Stoic concepts into this bullseye narrative helps an everyday person cope with immense workplace stress, why does the historical or philosophical purity matter?
Because removing that philosophical purity systematically eviscerates Stoic epistemology. It amputates Stoic ethics from its foundational physics. And when you do that, you fundamentally change the entire purpose of the philosophy.
Break that down for me. Because ancient Stoicism obviously relied on a very different understanding of the universe. But why does dropping their outdated physics invalidate the ethical advice on how to handle an overflowing email inbox?
Because ancient Stoicism was an all-or-nothing package of logic, physics, and ethics. Their physics posited a strictly deterministic universe governed by the logos, logos, or a rational divine providence.
Meaning everything happens for a reason.
Right? Everything that happened was pre-programmed and fundamentally good for the cosmic whole. The classical compatibilist metaphor they used was the dog tied to a cart.
Right, we are the dog, fate is the cart.
Exactly. The cart is moving whether we like it or not. We can either choose to trot alongside it willingly, or we can resist and be dragged over the rocks.
Which totally aligns with the modern interpretation, doesn't it? Acceptance of what you can't control.
Only superficially. The ancient Stoic accepted adversity because it was ordained by the divine logos, logos. Virtue was the absolute only good, but Holliday's framework grasps modern free will and capitalist ambition onto these ancient deterministic teachings.
You think it subverts the original goal?
It completely subverts it. It turns stillness into a covert strategic maneuver to achieve external success. A promotion, a better athletic record, a higher profit margin. Those are the very external things true Stoicism commands you to relinquish. The result is a framework that is logically and philosophically incoherent.
I hear you, but I'm not convinced that incoherence is a deal breaker for the average reader.
Why not?
Because if I use Epictetus's dichotomy of control to stop obsessing over office politics,
I don't need to believe in a divine, predetermined universe to get the benefit of lower blood pressure.
Okay, but
Just to finish the thought, I view it as a necessary triage. If you are in a sinking ship, you need to know how to tread water. This book teaches people how to tread water in a highly demanding corporate environment.
let's unpack the hidden assumption there. Why are we coping?
Sure, it teaches you to tread water, but the captain is actively drilling holes in the hull. This brings us to the socioeconomic implications of the text.
Okay, let's go there.
When you strip away the cosmos and focus entirely on micro-level utility, the text begins to operate as a stealth instrument of neoliberal pacification.
That is a very heavy charge. You're arguing that by teaching people to regulate their emotions, the book is actively producing compliance for exploitative systems?
I am. By restricting the locus of human control purely to internal emotional regulation, the philosophy implicitly absolves systemic inequality, exploitative labor practices, and structural institutional abuse.
It ignores the root cause. Exactly. If you are taught that the only thing that matters is your internal reaction to an obstacle, you completely stop questioning who put the obstacle there in the first place.
But again, we don't have a magic wand to instantly fix late-stage capitalism. A worker dealing with a toxic boss today needs a coping mechanism today.
Triage is one thing, but weaponized apathy is another. Academic scholars point to a very relevant historical parallel: Senecismo in 1930s Spain.
Senecismo.
Yeah. Reactionary intellectuals refashioned Stoic theory to facilitate the introduction of fascism. They instructed the populace to embrace Stoic resignation and told them not to adopt, quote, exaggerated attitudes when faced with systemic failure or oppression.
Wow, that's a dark parallel.
In our modern corporate context, commodified stillness executes a similar ideological maneuver. A workforce programmed with this philosophy doesn't demand better working conditions or unionize. It internalizes abysmal conditions as an obstacle provided by fate to practice personal resilience.
You know, that critique reminds me of a specific interaction from the source material. During an episode of the Econ Talk podcast, a 28-year-old listener provided a pretty harrowing reflection.
Oh, the listener who was working insane hours?
Yes, they described working a soul-crushing 15-hour workday. And on top of that, they felt like a spiritual failure because they couldn't juggle the prescriptive demands of the self-help industry, the morning yoga, the journaling, the meditation, in order to find this promised stillness.
And that story perfectly crystallizes the cruelty of this framework. Instead of that worker recognizing their sheer exhaustion as the direct intended result of an exploitative labor model, the philosophy aggressively forces them to internalize a macroeconomic failure as a personal spiritual deficit.
It blames the victim, essentially.
Exactly. It suggests that if you are breaking down under a 15-hour workday, it's not because the hours are inhumane. It's because your journaling routine is insufficient. It takes structural problems and hyper-individualizes them.
I absolutely see the danger in that psychological loop. It creates a secondary layer of stress, the stress of failing at your own stress management. And I will concede that this dynamic exists within a highly lucrative commercial ecosystem.
Right. The book isn't just a text. It's the center of a massive brand.
It really is.
It is the ultimate hypocrisy of commodification. Scholars have compared this to the Joel Osteenification of philosophy. You have a doctrine that was originally developed to teach profound indifference to material wealth, and it is now serving as the top-of-funnel marketing mechanism for premium newsletters, online courses, and overpriced brass coins stamped with memento mori.
It has definitely become a lucrative ecosystem. I want to pivot back to the actual daily practice of this philosophy, though. I hear your critique on the systemic labor level,
Okay.
but what about the core prescription itself? The advice to simply disconnect, limit media inputs, step away from the smartphone, and seek out physical solitude? Isn't that a universal human need, regardless of what economic system we operate under?
Not exactly. Noise affects everyone, yes, but the ability to tune it out is a luxury.
A luxury.
Yes, that assumption exposes the core thesis as acutely blind to cultural realities.
It caters almost exclusively to a highly privileged, weird demographic. Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic.
Why is it exclusive to that demographic, though? A blue-collar worker in a developing nation can still find 10 minutes of silence under a tree.
Finding a moment of silence isn't the issue. The issue is the prescriptive advice to treat external information as mere noise that should be ignored.
Ah, I see.
Retreating into healing solitude fundamentally assumes a baseline of physical safety, temporal autonomy, and economic privilege that marginalized global populations absolutely do not possess.
Because their noise isn't just an annoying Twitter feed, it's vital survival data.
Precisely. If your basic physical survival depends entirely on hypervigilance to external threats, say you need to monitor shifting local immigration policies or watch for localized institutional violence, the ability to simply disconnect is a literal impossibility. It is a privilege of the safe.
Well, I would argue that even people in highly vulnerable situations need mental breaks to avoid complete psychological collapse. Sure, but I understand your point. The framework treats all external material obstacles as equivalent. It treats an overflowing email inbox and the threat of sudden housing insecurity as the same category of things outside my control that should just be accepted.
Yes, and by treating them as equivalent, it propagates a dangerous sociopolitical apathy disguised as enlightenment. Think about the logical conclusion of this philosophy.
Which is what?
If the only valid metric of success is maintaining a perfectly unruffled internal state of stillness, then engaging in the messy, inherently disturbing work of political resistance or collective bargaining is framed as a failure. The ideal citizen in this paradigm is someone who observes profound injustice with perfect sociopathic equanimity.
Wow.
It completely erases material vulnerability in favor of marginal performance optimization for C-suite executives.
We've covered incredibly diverse terrain today, from the historical reality of the Cold War to the psychological demands placed on modern workers. I want to pull these threads together.
Please do.
I still maintain that on a micro, individual level, we are a society drowning in distraction. If Holiday's framework is the life raft that helps an overwhelmed worker survive their day, reclaim their focus, and find 5 minutes of peace before they go to sleep, that has immense practical value.
Even with the blind spots?
Yes, because we don't have to fix the entirety of late-stage capitalism before we are allowed to benefit from a quiet mind. But I will concede that your data-driven analysis has exposed significant, unignorable blind spots and how this philosophy is packaged and sold.
And I will maintain that the packaging is exactly what makes it dangerous. We have to look at the macro level. When a philosophy relies on extreme survivorship bias, it acts as an analytical equivalent of firing an arrow into a wall and meticulously painting a bullseye around it.
Right.
By divorcing Stoic ethics from its cosmological roots and by completely ignoring systemic realities, commodified stillness emerges not as a glorious recovery of ancient wisdom, but as a palliative illusion. It is a localized bandage, masking a massive modern societal pathology, teaching us to silently endure the very systems we should be working to change.
It really is a profound tension between individual psychological survival and collective structural responsibility. We encourage our listeners to use this rigorous deconstruction to actively build their own mental immunity. As you navigate the world of highly marketable self-help, ask yourself, does this framework help me see the world more clearly, or does it just make the burning building feel a little more comfortable? Thank you for joining us on Cognitive Dose.